The passage of time is cruel for humans, aging. Incredibly consistently youthful for artworks, which from generation to generation will build their own beautiful meaning for the humans who will be facing them, inspired by them. Art is really the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? The new becomes past. Then the past is renewed when revisited, embellishing the present of each. It is such beautiful cycle, like nature cycle of seasons, recycling itself. Perhaps the key to it is the memory. Perhaps it's bliss to have a rather short-term memory, because if you have too much of a long-term memory, you might be self-censoring yourself by it's all been done. But all hasn't been said, at least not as each of you will. I value so much the added value of the individual creator. Recreator? So what? With or without re? When Stravinsky embraces after what was considered great advancement in music through the Rite of Spring in 1913, the uneven metered pulses and the well, because of lack of upbeat that gives that earthy, always 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 downbeat energy, so earthy, as well as the dissonances that do not need consonances, therefore they are not dissonances anymore. They're aesthetically their own consonances. And when he wrote during the Roaring Twenties, after that so-called neoclassical music, revisiting composers of the Baroque, as some detractors called that Bach with wrong notes or Greek columns out of plastic, and great names mentioned them, but I'm not going to quote who they were, because I think that ultimately the wisdom and the humility is to accept that everything in art comes from somewhere, consciously or unconsciously. But what matters is not just to organize the lineage in a textbook about academic knowledge of chronology of art, which it's like learning anatomy, fine. But each piece, however contextual in its own time period, sociologically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, is defined by its time. But somehow when we visit or revisit the piece, all of a sudden it's universally timeless by becoming urgently present, meaningfully so. And I think that regardless of what language an artist uses to express themselves, the honesty that drives in the first place the expression is the one that really moves me so deeply, and I'm sure all of you too. Despite the coating of the intellectual organization of the elements. Complexity for the sake of it, simplicity for the sake of it, no. I I think it's only the translation of an inner world that comes to materialize on music paper. And then it's brought alive when you look at it. Like this last stunningly emotional, purely romantically so, which is paradoxic when you talk of Stravinsky, as the last page of his slow movement, neoclassical time period, piano concerto of 1924. Perhaps he's as bold to state something so simply modal, so emotionally step motion singing dropping scale, when a decade earlier you were famous for revolutionizing through octotonic, polyrhythmic, and all kinds of dissonances music to another level of dimension, for which the treatises and the music history books praise the Stravinsky way more than for his neoclassicism. Not a form of regression, in my opinion. It's just another form of universality. The middle section has this dropping transition of the piano and then entering in this relative minor, incredibly tender theme. Who would have guessed that was Stravinsky? Oh, of course, I am truly emotional, so I don't have the capacity anymore to play it so detached from its emotional content. But that I live for the younger generations of my students could do it very well. But perhaps the example was meant, in fact, to prove you that Stravinsky was so free in his mind that he was allowing to leave after himself something aesthetically so far away from the Rite of Spring that made him world famous only less than a decade when that was written. It's the piece that matters. It brings you an inspiration, it brings you in an escapism where you enter in another dimension of time, world, space, emotion, intensity. You don't even have to call all of these words, it just transports you. Might be surprising to know who wrote it because of who you expect it to be. Musically, for most of his famous works, this is not his famous work, but regardless, I find that to be a great sign of humility of his and wisdom, a certain level of maturity to accept to write musically and live after you different ways of expressing through your creativity all the past that has been nurtured in you, which becomes timeless.